Welcome to the mylifeinconcert.com podcast. I'm your host, Various Artists, and please join me as I travel back and revisit every live show I've seen from 1975 to the present. And it all happened in a matter of seconds. And when it came to the really crucial moments and decisions, it was more like split seconds. And these are the kinds of decisions you make in the moment, because everything is happening at warp speed and there is no time for reasoned logic. It's about acting in the moment on raw instinct. Look, all I know is that location, opportunity, happenstance, synchronicity, and who knows, possibly kismet, all conspired into a quickly wound ball of circumstances that put me in a once-in-a-lifetime situation, both physically and epiphanically. Hey everybody, this is the mylifeinconcert.com podcast. I'm your host, Various Artists, and welcome to my first anniversary episode, even though it's the podcast's second anniversary. And I'll get to that pretzel logic in just a moment. Anyway, welcome to episode 23 starring Keith Richards and the X-Pensive Winos at the Fox Theater, Detroit, Michigan, USA, Thursday, December 8th, 1988. And this episode is called Connection. I'd like to welcome back returning listeners as well as new listeners. Now, in the My Life in Concert series, as I said, I started writing the blog back in 2010 over on Open Salon, then had my own, came up with my own site, mylifeinconcert.com, but started it as a podcast in February of 2020, February 7th or 8th of 2020. Now, last year, the first anniversary of the blog, the podcast, I didn't mark the anniversary. With the blog, which I started in June on Open Salon in 2010, every year on that anniversary, I mark the occasion by recreating an album cover that I really like. So to do something to mark the podcast anniversary, I've decided that each year on the anniversary, I'm going to jump into some point in the story, into the future, and focus on concerts that were really important to me on some level, significant. There's something I want to say. I really want to talk about the show. And because I didn't do one for my first anniversary, and this is now the second, I'm going to do two this year. One now to coincide a little bit late with the first, with the podcast anniversary. Then I'm doing another one in June. And then we'll be caught up and we'll go from there. So again, today we're jumping 5 years into the future because I left off in 83 and we're moving into 1988. An incredible show by Keith Richards, which, as you will hear, it was amazing enough to be there, but a set of circumstances happened for the encore that put me in this incredible position and place to take in that encore, and I really had some big realizations watching it, and I'm going to get to those later in the podcast. Also, in today's episode, it's a little more sweary than some of the other ones are, and if you're a regular listeners, and there's kids around, a little more sweary today than usual. Just quickly, I'd like to remind listeners to check out the mylifeinconcert.com website, chronicling this and many other shows between 1975 and 2021. I finally had an entry for 2021, my last episode 22 on Caribou at the London Music Hall in November of 2021. So anyway, I've got a number of blog entries. There's one for Keith, and with the Caribou one on the Keith one, these are the first new blog entries I have written since 2015. I mean, there was a couple where it's mostly images and some comments, but these are the first two fully written pieces I've done for the blog, and as I go forward, there will be more. So if you like the podcast, check out the blog entries. They usually have a lot of extra information, photos, links, videos, the original ticket, ephemera from the time. And for today, in the Keith episode, this comes from this period of the late 80s where I was keeping journals, and when my series hits that point, there's going to be some great detailed recountings of shows, as you'll hear later today. Oh, and also the blog has my Spotify playlist that I put up. Plus, I also have my Spotify playlist there under various artists as my username. But it's just as easy to search on mylifeinconcert.com or MLIC, followed by a prompt, as all of my playlists start that way, or simply follow me on Spotify. Of course, we're also on Facebook and have our YouTube channel, and we're starting to build up our Instagram, so please like, follow, and subscribe where applicable. All right, back to the show. Now, this is really interesting. Getting to see this show in many ways was one I'd been preparing for my whole life. I've written and podcasted about this in the introduction and Roxy Music episodes, that I was a born tunehead. For a lot of people, they may be conscious of music when they're much younger or may like songs or whatever, but it's not really, it's something people tend to get into more in their teenage years. And for me, it was innate right from the start. And I grew up in a house in the 60s with older siblings who luckily were listening to the great music of the day, or chunks of the great music of the day. And especially the big four from the UK were very ever-present in my mind: the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, and the Kinks. And all of that music is just literally ingrained in my DNA. And as I mentioned, the Stones were one of them. And it's not like I discovered any of these bands. I just started having memories that I can remember, and they were there because these bands were always there. So it's something that sort of grew along with me. And with the Stones, my brother had a lot of their albums, but the first album I ever received, and it was from a visiting aunt and uncle, was Out of Our Heads, the North American edition. And I got that in 1967. Unfortunately, my sister broke it accidentally the next year. I was heartbroken. But that was the first album that I owned. And one of the very first singles, and this I do still have, is Dandelion with We Love You on the flip side. That's one I had asked for, and that my parents bought it for me. But, along with all the Stones and all of these bands, this music was on. And I've also talked in those earlier episodes about how, while the radio was on and I was listening to it, I was more influenced by the records being played in the house and the records being brought over by my siblings' friends and that sort of thing. Because it was a lot of stuff that wasn't on the radio or the full album where you heard different tracks, that sort of thing. But it's not like I was just passively absorbing this as it was in the background. I was actively interested from the get-go. I wanted to know everything about records. I would know the different singles that I had even before I could read the titles. It's just something that's very, very innate with me. In the blog entry for my introduction, I actually have a photo there of myself at about 1 year old, doing what I was told I was constantly trying to do, get into the hi-fi, probably because I wanted to hear the Beatles. So music was always a very, very big thing for me. The first album I ever bought with my own money when I was 7 years old, I saved up my quarter allowance for several months to buy the Kinks, Arthur, the Decline and Fall of the British Empire. So that's what I was grooving on at 7. And but as time went on, I had more money and started buying more records. And then, of course, with the Stones, all of their other records had been in the house, and now I was buying them of my own accord. And this is a band I've never really stopped following. I mean, I see their glory days as the 60s and 70s, and I have everything from that period. And I have a big chunk of what came later. And I loved their last studio album of new material, A Bigger Bang. But regardless, they're a band I've always followed and listened to, and they've been there my whole life. However, because there is there's a blog entry and a podcast coming up. It's concert number 61, and it's the Rolling Stones on the opening night of their Steel Wheels tour in Toronto at C&E Stadium, 7th row center. That's coming up, and I'm going to do a whole thing at that time on the Stones. And so I'm kind of leave their career in the background and really just focus on Keith. Now, in terms of Keith's role in the band, of course, he's the human riff, and his style of playing is so imitated and ubiquitous, yet no one does it quite like him. And his riffs and his playing are one of the immediate sonic signatures of the band. Now, as for being a vocalist, a lead vocalist, he had done backing vocals, but he got co-lead vocal credits on Between the Buttons, which came out in early 1967. And that's one of two Stones albums that I think is grossly underrated. They have many properly heralded albums, but I think Between the Buttons is underrated, particularly the UK version. That's my favorite. I prefer that over the North American one. But he's on that, and he does a duet lead vocal on Connection with Mick Jagger. And then, of course, that last track on the album, Something Happened to Me Yesterday, a very Kinksy sort of song. Keith sings the chorus on that track. Mick does the verses, Keith does the chorus. So that was his first opening shots. Also, too, he sings the first verse of Salt of the Earth on Beggar's Banquet, which is rightfully heralded as one of their best. Now, he didn't get his full, complete star vocal turn until Let It Bleed in 1969 with You Got the Silver, one of my favorite tracks from that album, with his high, quavery sort of Neil Young voice. Very, very warm, and his whole it's sort of a let's give it a go vocal. It's a great counterpart to Jagger's more extrovert vocal delivery. Now, in the 70s, he aced three more tunes that were the highlights of each of their albums. Happy from Exile on Main Street, Coming Down Again from Goat's Head Soup, and Before They Make Me Run from Some Girls. Also, too, he does that little cameo in Memory Motel, a huge personal favorite from the other Stones album, I think, that's really underrated, Black and Blue. That is a huge favorite. I love that because for me, that's their groove album. And anyway, and so Memory Motel is one of the best. And I love Keith's little vocal interjection in the track. It's very effective. So, with Keith starring tracks as a solid highlight with fans and critics, it was inevitable that at some point he would make his own solo recording. And that time came in December of 1978, where on Virgin Records, he went to another label, he issued an all covers 45. And the A-side was Run, Rudolph, Run, the Chuck Berry tune, and released as a Christmas single. And the 7-inch had Jimmy Cliff's The Harder They Come on the back, and there's a 12-inch version where he also covers Toots and the Maytals' Pressure Drop. And it wasn't a huge hit, but certainly delighted his fans. It got great reviews. And, it must be said, it was a more stimulating solo outing than, say, Bill Wyman's Si Je Suis un Rockstar. Although, it's cheesy, but I kind of like that song as well. But from that point onward, from the 80s onwards, Keith started appearing more regularly as a lead vocalist on Rolling Stones tracks and always sings at least one number during the live show. But it wasn't until 1988, amidst pretty much a decade-long feud, a very well-known falling out among Mick and Keith, the Glimmer Twins. And of course, Mick had his solo albums. And so finally in 1988, Richards released Talk Is Cheap, his solo debut. Now, Jagger had made it known in the press that he was bored with the Stones and started releasing solo albums, starting with She's the Boss. And he even had a hit with it, Just Another Night. But it was, again, it's not bad. It's good, but it's not bad. But not anything super amazing. And then he came up with the follow-up, Primitive Cool, which was neither, and is sporting one of the worst album covers you will ever see. Meanwhile, Keith was fuming about this defection. And in Life, his amazing autobiography, eminently readable, hilarious. If you have not read it, I highly recommend. Entertaining is a word that comes to mind. Anyway, in the book Life, Keith Richards says this about that time. Anyone can get big-headed once in a while and think, I can do this with any old band. But obviously he proved it's not true. I can understand somebody wanting to kick the traces. I like to play with other people and do something else. But in his case, he had nothing really in mind except being Mick Jagger without the Rolling Stones. And so finally in response, and you got to remember too at this time, there really kind of was the feeling and almost acceptance that the Stones were done. Which is hard to think of now, but at the time it was, they're probably never going to get back together. This riff is unhealable. And so Keith finally put together his own band and signed a full solo deal with Virgin, where he put out his initial single. And again, the album's title, Talk is Cheap. It's an obvious reference to the, Jagger Richards handbags at 30 paces bitchery that had been playing out in the press between the two of them. As for the music itself, it ran the gamut of, Keith's musical passions from, of course, riffy rock, but also soul, funk, reggae, ballads, and R&B. And the tunes were really, really top-notch. Great album, great band, just great. In fact, then as now, I would rate Talk is Cheap as the best post-Tattoo You album by the Stones or any solo act from within. Now, around the same time, I was a student, but I was also working at a downtown record store. And I had gotten to know a fellow university student. Actually, he was a student in University of Waterloo, but was doing a transfer session or a couple of semesters here. And I'm going to call, and his pen name that I'm giving him, as I give pen names to people unless they're on it or are okay with using their own name. I'm calling him Keith Garcia Westerberg, so it's a hyphenated last name. As you can probably deduce from the name, he was a big fan, first of the Stones. He was a huge Stones fan. Also the Replacements. As for the Garcia part, that's the Grateful Dead, and that's a whole other story. I'm responsible for that, but we'll get to that another time. Basically, he was in my car, saw a few cassettes that I had there, and he said, wow, I've never really heard these guys. And I said, well, their output can be patchy, but when they're good, they're really good, and those are good ones. And anyway, he borrowed them, and then that was it. He was a deadhead, and he was following them everywhere after that. But, the things that happen in life. When I first met him, also he was a big Clash fan, too. The Stones were his be-all, end-all. And, of course, as I said, I've been a lifelong fan, but he had gone way beyond me and had collected a lot of boots and videos and all sorts of things. Now, as I said earlier, I've been a lifelong fan, but he far surpassed me. He was very obsessive. He had a lot of bootlegs, videos, all sorts of things. In fact, one of the things that really impressed me is that he had a copy of Robert Funk's Cocksucker Blues documentary that they hired him to shoot, and then they suppressed when it caught all the sex and drugs and rock and roll a little too clearly. Now, Keith had grown up in northern Ontario, way northern Ontario, and I've since been up there, and you're far away from everything. You're not close to anything. And being a big music fan and wanting to see these bands was very frustrating for him. And now that he was in southwestern Ontario, a very, very densely populated area with a lot of music at the time and venues in a variety of cities, especially Toronto, he now wanted to see all these bands that he had missed, and the Stones were number one on his list. When the Keith Richards show was announced, and there was no Toronto date, because I think at that point Keith still wasn't happy about what had happened with customs here, although the album was recorded in Quebec, now that I remember. But anyway, he went out and immediately bought tickets to the show in Detroit at the Fox Theater, even though he didn't have someone else lined up. He figured he'd find someone. And he used to come in the music store, and we were becoming chummy and hanging out. He said, I'm going to this Keith Richards show. Do you want to come? I have this extra ticket I could sell to you. And I'm like, absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to go to the show. The problem, though, was I was going through this period where, again, I'm in school, I'm a broke student, and my car had died. Actually, it died trying to get to and from a Bob Dylan concert in the late summer. And then that's coming up down the line as well. That's an adventure. So I didn't have a car, and it was like not until next spring that I finally had a new one. And so we had no wheels to get us there. I finally found out that someone I knew, a couple that I knew, who I'll call H and D. And D was a she who was a guitar player in the local scene and in local bands. And they were going with actually a fleet of people, and no problem, we could catch a ride down with them. So this was good. And one of the incredible things that happened, I've got to share this, while I was working on this episode, and going back, reading my journals of what was happening at the time. That's coming up shortly. And, you think, when I work on these things, I think back to the time and the people and some of the people you haven't seen in a while. And while working on the blog piece and what I'm going to be doing in the podcast today, and writing about how I went down with H&D, and I was thinking, like, I haven't seen H&D in about like 30 years. And on the weekend, in the middle of working on this, I went to the Richmond. I saw my very first live show of 2022. So 2022 has been de-virginized by me in terms of live music going, seeing the Wabi Sabi's great first set of the Richmond. And anyway, out for such a fun evening. And who do I run into but H and D for literally first time in almost 30 years or something like that. So, and it's just the synchronicity, the cosmic synchronicity of all this. It breaks my brain, but in a good way. Anyway, we got the tickets. We were all set to go. This was just going to be bitchin'. And on my blog entry, I've actually got chunks from my journal at the time, and I'm going to be reading some more from them today. And I've put one up. It was from the day he gave me the ticket. And it's like, in other big news, I'm going to see Keith Richards in Detroit on December 8th. So this was all really exciting. We were going to the show. Also, I've been to Detroit and through Detroit many, many, many times, but I had never seen a show there, so that was exciting too, something different. But the big problem was on the day of the show. Okay, so this is early December. I'm an English lit student. I was not a silver spoon student. I went back as a mature student, so I had to work and put myself through university. So I did a 4-year program in 6 years, while also working. So there weren't midterms for English Lit, but there were big essays that were all due in December about the same time. So my school workload is crazy. Then I'm also working at the record store because I have to support myself. Then plus every Friday morning I did a radio show on Radio Western or CHRW, and I had to prep for that. And then on top of that, I had a very busy social life. I was going out a lot, seeing a lot of live music, and just partying with people. And we all worked hard and partied hard. And unfortunately for myself, in those days, I wasn't good at having an off switch. And it's even happened since. I've gotten much, much better at this especially the last 6-7 years. My life is a lot more balanced, and I also know when to sort of like pull a plug when that needs to happen. But that really wasn't there at the time. And one thing that started happening around this time was I got completely worn down. And I got this condition where every time I even went to swallow saliva, it felt like I was swallowing an orange with razor blades sticking out. I cannot even begin to tell you how painful this is. And later on, they found out it was strep. But even further later on, when this condition kept reappearing in my life, through more swabs and testing, they found out it wasn't strep, and they've never fully been able to discern what this is. All I know is that when I get completely and totally worn down and under a lot of stress, this happens. And this now hasn't happened in quite some time because I manage it better. But this was all happening. It was new. It was excruciatingly painful. And I just thought it was this very bad sore throat that if I managed it, it might get better. And it just didn't. And on the day of the concert, I was in agony. Every time I went to even swallow saliva. Again, imagine trying to swallow an orange with razor blades sticking out every time you even swallow your saliva. And as I have found out from having this, we swallow our saliva a lot. But again, being determined and foolish, although I guess I'm kind of glad I was foolish because I wouldn't be talking to you now about this, but still, I thought there's no way I'm missing this concert. And so I just sort of piled up the Tylenol and kept drinking water and thought that it would get better. And unfortunate, it really didn't. So I spent most of the day in real pain. Again, this is from a time where I just didn't have much of a stop button with these things. Particularly extreme at this time with so many balls in the air. And I actually remember Dee of the H&D couple. She was a guitar player in a band and very rock and roll kind of gal. And we all, worked and partied hard. And I remember talking to her the day of it, and she was like, my God, take time for your health. Like basically saying like, take this stuff down a few notches. And I thought, well, if she's telling me this, perhaps I should listen. Anyways, the day of the gig, nothing much we can do. Met up with Keith Garcia Westerberg, and we headed over to H&D's and hung out there. And there was a bunch of us that left in a fleet of cars. We picked someone else up on the way, and on the road we went to Windsor. Now, they were going to be staying overnight in Detroit, and I had to be back. We both had to be back for the next day. So we ended up making this decision that they would drop us off in Windsor, where the Ambassador Bridge is. Keith and I would get our return tickets in Windsor and cab it over across the border, which would be no problem, of course. Been across the Detroit, Windsor-Detroit border, Ambassador Bridge a million times. And just over to the Fox Theatre, and then we'd cab it back and train back from Windsor to London. We thought, well, let's get our tickets now, get some food. So H&D and the gang dropped us off. They headed across the border. We got our tickets, got some food, got into a cab, went across the border, all very common, and we got stopped. Where are you going? What are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. Can I see your birth certificate? Now, I always have the proper identification on me, or at least I thought I did. And I reached in to get it and realized I didn't have my birth certificate. My dad was in the process of retiring. It may have been something to do with my mother's retirement, but he had borrowed my birth certificate for information and had forgotten to give it back. And I had forgotten that I had given it to him because it is always, in my wallet. Well, suffice it to say, this didn't go over very well. Now, I'm going to read the next bits from my journal. And this is what happened, and I'll read the entry about the night and that day. And it's like, and also you can read this full original blog entry on the website with my messy writing, bad punctuation, capitalization, grammar, the whole thing. I was usually writing this before bedtime, sort of half tired, probably half cut. And so anyway, it's up on the site. Thursday night, went to see Keith Richards in Detroit, a complete blast. But there's a long story that begins with the fact that I felt like total hell by Thursday and was having trouble swallowing. My throat was raw, not in the best condition for a road trip. I picked up Keith in the afternoon. We went to H&D's, then piled into the car along with their friend, took a ton of aspirins and Bradisol with me, so I managed to feel at least so-so. Picked up our tickets in Windsor, split up, got our bus ticket for our trip back. Sorry, bus ticket, not train ticket. And Dad, as it turns out, Dad had borrowed my birth certificate because he needed some info, right, to do with my mom's retiring. And I had a royal hassle at the border. This total obnoxious prick was yelling at me and wasn't going to let me in the country. Can you imagine what would happen today if, and again, this was unintentional. This was a genuine mistake, but oh wow, this would have been 20 times even worse today. We had to go into the immigration office where they asked me a pile of questions, went through my wallet, ran a check on me, and then I got a long lecture about traveling without my birth certificate, and 20 minutes later they finally let us go. On with the show. I also remember them telling me, if you didn't have that ticket, you'd be strip searched right now. And the ticket ended up being the godsend because we had it. It corroborated everything that we were doing. So anyway, on with the show. We got to the Fox Theater in Detroit, and my God, this place was beautiful. It's one of those super ornate, extravagant old movie houses. So anyway, that's my notes from the time. Once we got across the border and inside, in our seats, I have zero recollection of an opening act. So either there was one and I can't remember, or because of the hassle at the border and delay, we missed the opener. I can't remember who opened. One thing I definitely do remember with fond amusement from this night is a particular interaction I had with a woman who was sitting next to me. Now, I would have been in my mid-20s. Keith Garcia Westerberg would have been more early 20s at this time. And this was a couple who actually, she would be 37. Based on the information. Now, at the time, that was, oh, this is an older couple. Now I'm 59, and they're still pups at that age to me. But anyway, we got talking about the Stones. She was there with her husband. I was sitting beside her, and we got talking about the Stones, and she told me this great story. When they played Detroit in 1981 on their Tattoo You tour, I can't remember where it was, Pontiac Silverdome. It was a big outdoor stadium in the Detroit area. And the day of the show also happened to be the same day as her 30th birthday. And she was a big Stones fan, so it's like, I've got to go. But she was a teacher, and she swore to me she had never called in sick unreasonably, and this is the one and only time she told a lie to get out of it and see this, to not get out of work and see this show on her 30th birthday, an important birthday. So anyway, they got tickets, went to the show, were having a blast. At one point, she was up on her husband's shoulder, shoulders, arms in the air, that sort of thing, woohoo. And she was captured by a photographer from the Detroit Free Press who saw this. And the next morning, she said her picture was on the front of the Detroit Free Press. And she woke up just in mortification and had to go into work. And they were all sort of waiting for her with big smiles on. And it's like, how you doing today? And everyone was really, really cool about it. But she was just like, oh, no. So I thought that was pretty funny. But then we had this other exchange, which was a little bizarre. We got talking about the Stones and music. She said, well, what's your favorite Rolling Stones song? And I said, well, it's hard to pick, really just one. But if I'm going to, it's going to be Gimme Shelter, I think. Yeah. Okay. So if you've read my blog entries and, followed some of the podcasts, you know that my tastes and kind of a little more askew, and I don't always bell with everyone with the big favorites and stuff, but like Gimme Shelter, it's a fan favorite. When Mojo did a survey of their readers in 2007, it was voted number one, and they interviewed Keith for this poll, and he was thrilled because he said this is his favorite Rolling Stones song, and he had a big hand in writing it. And so it's not like this is I'm going for a super obscure choice with this one. I mean, it's my choice regardless, but there are plenty of people who would rate Gimme Shelter as one of their best songs. And I said Gimme Shelter, and, she looked at me like I'd farted or something. And it's like, well, what song do you like? And she looks at me with this sort of face of, oh, come on, buddy. She says, Fool to Cry. I'm like, oh. And, I love Fool to Cry. And as I've said earlier, the whole Black and Blue album, it's such a great groove album. And I love that tune. But then as now, she is the only person I've ever met whose favorite Stone song is Fool to Cry. I'm sure there's a few more, but it's not like it's a super obvious answer. Anyway, that was an exchange. But then again, that's the stuff I love about concerts, this kind of stuff, because this is what you remember. Now, in terms of the show starting, that I also remember because it was so weird. The house lights went down. The entire theater is in blackness. And, everyone's going nuts. And there's equipment on the stage. And, of course, the equipment has a lot of lights and stuff, little lights, to make sure things are on or frequency. And you can see that people are on the stage and moving around because some of these lights will be blacked out as somebody walks along. And so you're figuring that any moment now, the lights are going to go up, the band's going to start. And so everyone's in the dark. Someone's on this stage and nothing. We just all sat there in the dark and, the sort of whoops and hollers got a little less whoopier and hollering. And it was like, what the hell is going on? And it went on for several minutes. And everyone would say, what's happening? And then finally the lights come up, they're on the stage, and they launch in. And anyway, in Keith's book, Life, he explains what that was all about. And he says, with the X-Pensive Winos, we'd black out the stage, and the whole band would sit in a circle, smoking a joint and having a drink. And people didn't know we were there. Actually, we did, Keith. And then the lights would go up and we'd break. And so that's what that was all about, because it was like, what the hell? And again, once they were on the stage, they were just off and running, and the set was fantastic. I'm going to turn back to my notes, and this is what I had to say musically about the evening. The show was great. The band was Keith with Steve Jordan on drums, Ivan Neville on keyboards and guitar, Waddy Wachell on guitar, Charlie Drayton on bass, Bobby Keys on sax, and Sarah Dash from the Great LaBelle was there and sang backup on a few numbers. Now, he did his entire album plus 7 Stones tunes, including 2 big surprises. I Want to Be Your Man, which, of course, the Beatles wrote for the Stones, and that was their second single. And, of course, the Beatles recorded that on With the Beatles with Ringo. And also Connection, the first song of the encore. Plus Happy, Lil T&A, Too Rude, Before They Make Me Run, and they did this slow, bluesy version of Time Is On My Side with Sarah Dash on lead vocals. Wow. Ditto for when they did Make No Mistake. So the set was incredible. The band was incredible. It's just everything. And just the everyone in such high spirits. As for us, as the show went on, our seating got better and better. And I turn back now to my journal. We had good seats, but kept making our way up. And finally, we spent the last third of the show right up near the front. For the encore, Keith Garcia Westerberg got right to the front of the stage. I was about 10 feet back, but jumped on a chair in the crowd and had a perfect view. The audience came up to my knees, with Keith Richards just a few feet away. It was the best view I've ever had at a show, I think. And the show was great. Not I think, it was. What am I saying? I think it was. Then and now it was. So anyway, what happened was this. Throughout the show, people had been leaving their seats to try to go down and sort of dance around the front of the stage. And the security wasn't letting them do that. They were sort of corralling them to the sides. But more and more people were leaving their seats and trying to come down. I think at first they were sending them back, and then they just stopped and let them, stand on the sides. And so it was clear some of these people weren't coming back and would be like, okay, those 2 seats are open. And we'd go grab them. Then 2 seats closer would come up. Until finally we got near the end, we were very, very close to the front. Now, the moment they walked off the stage, everyone knew there was going to be an encore. And everyone, well, not everyone, but a chunk of the audience made a rush for the front of the stage. Again, this all happened in seconds. Now, this was the orchestra pit in the Fox. So, as with a lot of places, theaters like this where they'll have an orchestra pit, you've got your fixed seating that is most of the venue. And then for the orchestra pit, because you usually have orchestras in there, you can't put, fixed seats. You simply put loose chairs that are numbered for the ticket. And there's people sitting there, but everyone just rushed the stage and all the chairs just got knocked over and turned over. And everyone's focus was on getting very, very close to the stage. Now, of course, when you have the stage and the pit, there's an upward incline that goes back from the stage. So the further back you go, the higher up you are. And again, there was about maybe about 10 feet of people between myself and the front of the stage when I got there. And Keith Garcia got right to the front. And it was immediately filling up by the second. And all of a sudden, I just got this idea to flip a chair over and stand on it. I thought, if people are yelling at me behind, whatever. But what happened was people were sort of standing in and around the piles of chairs in front of me, but the crowd was now so dense they couldn't do that. But everyone sort of parallel to me in front of the stage got the same idea, as did people behind me. So what the result was that, given the upward curvature from the stage being just the right amount of space back, then being on the chair, which afforded me those extra couple of feet, it meant that I was now perfectly level with the stage. Again, when it was clear that no one in front of me was going to do this, it was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. However, as cool as that was, I then had a second realization that not only was I on the same level of the stage, I was directly in front of Keith's mic. So in the middle of all this, I'm having these realizations, and this is what was sort of going through my head. Now, of course, around me, there's just pure pandemonium of everyone rushing up and trying to get settled in the excitement that the encore is going to be coming. Meanwhile, there I am standing on this chair, processing all this, and my series of thoughts went like this. Now, if this was a movie recreation of this event, it would probably be a thing that there'd be sort of Vaseline on the lens, and the crowd would be sort of muted in the background, and my voice would be put through some sort of effect, sort of an echoey sort of effect, and it would go like this. The first realization, of course, was, wow, I can't believe this happened, and I now have this incredible, unobstructed view of the stage. Just 10 feet from the stage. Sweetness. And then that gave way to realization number 2. I am standing precisely, specifically, directly across from Keith's microphone. He's going to be back on this stage in a few minutes, and I'm going to be looking at him playing the encore, dead on, right across from him. Holy fuck, this is going to be amazing! Then came realization number 3. I am standing precisely and specifically directly across from Keith's microphone. He is going to be back on this stage in a few minutes, and I will be looking directly at him, dead on, as he plays the entire encore. This is going to be seriously fucking weird. Fuck! So, as the insanity and joy swirled around me, and I'm not saying I was in a bad mood in any way, but I just had to take this in of what was about to transpire, because I realized, man, this is just going to be really, really weird. And then a few minutes later, just as I expected, there he was, dead in front of me. It would be like if, you could take a plank of wood from where I was to the stage and just walk directly across. And yeah, it was weird. Now, there's also, the thing about being seen, because you go to see the performer, but I think everyone in the audience kind of likes the idea of being seen by the artist. So I'm thinking at some point he has to have looked at me because I'm standing dead across from him. But who knows? Keith's been doing this for years. It could be a thing that he's just staring off into the lights, just concentrating. But it's still kind of cool, thinking that you could be seen by one of your favorite artists at the show. And it's just that reciprocal connection and reciprocity. And of course, the first encore of the evening was Connection, the song from Between the Buttons, him doing a full lead. But because in all honesty, I have almost no recollection of the music during the encore. It's one of these things, and I've gotten even better at this through the years, where if I'm in a moment and I realize it's a very special and unrepeatable moment, I will just try to put everything else out of my head and just focus on what's happening. And I did, but it wasn't really the music I was focusing on. I was in the middle of this scenario where you had this frenzied, adoring crowd down in the pit. They were literally having kittens on the spot from being in this proximity. And then there were the musicians on the stage. They were all in the zone. They were joyful. They were playing away. While Keith was the magnet at the center of all this, a light beam, an energy field so intense that everything and everyone was in this ecstatic orbit around him. Again, it was really exciting to be there in the midst of all that. But as I watched Keith on stage working so hard, again, just feet away from me, also to seeing him up close, it was like, and this was in 1988, it's like, okay, wow, they really airbrush his photos. And there was that aspect. He was a little rougher looking than I was expecting. And in the midst of all this, it was exciting, but what I saw, especially as I saw him working so hard on stage and playing, I had a realization. I saw something I really wasn't expecting to see from this vantage point. And what I saw is I saw his humanity. Now, when I say that, I don't mean anything like, cool, blimey, Keith's the Mother Teresa of rock and roll, or kumbaya and holding hands. Nothing like that at all. No. That's not what I mean. What I mean is this. I became aware of Keith the image versus Keith the person. This is someone whose face I'd seen 1,000 times in my life. On album covers, magazines, sometimes on TV, or sometimes even in movies, such as Gimme Shelter or Cocksucker Blues, which I just watched. But these are all 2D images, remote, flat, and they capture a depiction of a life, but with a lot of important information missing. And not only are these curated images disconnected from a larger life, they also tend to intermingle with people officially playing characters in movies, TV, theater. Person and persona, factual and fictional, can become blurred. In many ways, we consume celebrities as if they were fictional characters. They're often as equally remote from most of our lives as any created character. And from the Beatles through the Spice Girls, many celebrities are presented as personas with parameters for easy public digestion. But what can be forgotten is that they aren't fictional. And behind these images are often messy, imperfect, and real lives, just like the rest of us. It struck me while watching Keith that, on one hand, you could describe what was happening in front of me as a world-famous rock star on fire, basking in the glory on center stage, flanked by his adoring audience and backup band, and that would be a correct depiction. But I also realized it would be as easily correct to say, this is a guy at work doing his job, or a person at work doing their job, whatever. This is someone at work. At the time, I was a university student and a part-time record store worker. Those were my jobs. In the audience, there were probably a mix of people from many walks of life, ranging from lawyers to factory workers to civil servants to, as we know for sure, at least one teacher. Everyone has a job to do. And just because one is much more glamorous than most doesn't mean that it's still not someone's job and what they do for their living. And yes, Keith is an artist, but art is work, lots of it. And being a traveling musician means having a constantly upended life, a lifestyle not made for everyone. And then there's Keith's own tumultuous life. And he's been very honest about this. God, it's detailed in his book. And a lot of people see all the perks and fun that come with being Keith Richards, but he's also just a human being with a life of family and friends and all the joys and sorrows that come with that. Yeah, he's had all these amazing experiences, but he's also lost a child, had serious drug problems, major battles with his main collaborator, and more. And then there's just the endless life on the road. A lot of these harder, darker, and just plain boring parts tend to be brushed out of these magazine pieces and public fandom. But it doesn't mean it's not there. While I always knew that rock stars are people too, there's a big difference between knowing something and truly understanding something. And that's what hit home for me during this show, that understanding. Keith has this image, but there's a real person behind it. And like most of us, any glories we've had in life often come with a lot of sacrifices and challenges. So on this night, all up close and personal, I saw the working person rather than the global star. And it was an incredible experience, and again, once in a lifetime. But all things must come to an end. And so it was that the encore eventually concluded amid much celebration. After the show, for us, I'm going to go back to my journal. This is what I wrote. After the show, Keith and I cabbed it back across the border. No problem coming into Canada. In fact, I didn't even have to show any ID at all. And Keith Garcia, Westerberg's sister, who lives in Windsor, picked us up and took us to a bar where we relaxed, gabbed, and killed time until the bus left at 1:30 in the morning. Didn't get home until 4:30 in the morning, and Friday I felt like shit. I struggled through my radio show and then went home to bed. I'd forgotten that. I can't believe I got up the next morning and did the broadcast. So on Friday night, my dad convinced me to go to a walk-in clinic and took me there. And I had the strep throat virus, and the doctor put me on penicillin for the next 10 days. I had to call in sick to work today. I also didn't work Wednesday. And so here I am sitting in bed on a Saturday afternoon, relaxing and listening to the Cowboy Junkies. The Amnesty concert is on tonight. Goody, something to watch. So anyway, that's what happened. And what's also incredible that I need to point out here that hit me on reflection after leaving the show. Of course, as I mentioned, the pain I was in that day, and the moment the show ended, it all came back. But here's the thing. The whole time the show was on and the music was playing, the whole thing, I totally forgot I was in pain. And I realized this after the pain was probably there, but the joy of the music and the adrenaline of the gig totally blocked it out. It's truly incredible, music's healing and transformative powers, even loud, noisy music. It's incredible what it can do. As for Keith, I would see him again 9 months later in another One for the Ages gig, 7th row center at CNE Stadium, as the Rolling Stones rose from the dead, kicking off their Steel Wheels tour on that night. And also the next phase of their career as, warlords of the global road. I don't really need to fill in anyone on Keith's life and capers, since musically as a solo artist, he went on to make more of a so-so follow-up, Main Offender in 1992, and a much better delayed third album, Cross-Eyed Heart, in 2015. And he even wrote a second book for children about his grandfather called Gus and Me. And of course, the Stones keep rolling on, delighting millions, even with the loss of the irreplaceable Charlie Watts in 2021. Really, there's been so many great people dying these days, but Charlie in particular really hit me. Mick, mind you, it has to be said, his 80s solo career was pretty crappy. But in 1993, he made an album called Wandering Spirit that I've always loved. So Mick did eventually release a really terrific solo album. So, but still, this is one of the reasons I chose it for the anniversary, is this is one of the most memorable gigs of my life. And while the music was so good, what lingers longest in my mind from that night is that it was a night of connection. This wraps up my first anniversary episode, looking back at this amazing Keith Richards gig. Now, as I said at the top of the podcast, I'm going to be doing a second anniversary episode, as I didn't do one last year for the podcast, and that will be coming up in June in tandem with the anniversary of the blog back from 2010. And the second anniversary show is going to look at an incredible gig by Laura Nero in Toronto in the summer of '89. And there's a blog entry for that up on the site. Now, as for next time, apologies, this show has been delayed. It should have been a few episodes ago, but then I saw the Caribou Show, which I did for episode 22, because I wanted to finish what I started at the beginning of the podcast, where I looked at one show from each decade, and finally I got to see one this decade. And then, of course, I've done the anniversary with Keith. So for episode 24, please tune in next time for a show that retrospectively it represented a changing of the guards in the alternative world at this particular point in music history, with one sort of musical generation sun setting as the sun rose on another. Come back next time for episode 24, my concert number 16, entitled End of the Party, featuring the Beat, or the English Beat as they were known on this side of the pond, playing here in London, Ontario, Canada, with me returning to Alumni Hall on the campus of Western University, where I saw Elvis Costello in 1978, which I covered off in episode 8, and Joe Jackson in 1982, which I looked at in episode 19. The Beat also had this opening act with them, this new U.S. band who had just released their debut album that week. And it's a band you might have heard of called REM. Special guest Phil Robinson once again returns to share his memories of the evening. And he has a lot of them. He has some great stories for this one. And that's fortuitous, as I actually have scant recollection of details from this night. Tune in next time for Stage Invasions, a cultural shift, and wondering what the hell I was thinking. I'd like to say a big thanks to listeners, both new and returning, for taking the time to listen. Please remember to check out the mylifeinconcert.com website for the blog entry for this, and I'm now back to writing new ones. This and the Caribou one are the first two new blog entries that I've written since 2015, full-scale entries anyway. And it features additional information, links, pictures to videos. I also have pictures of my Keith in a Can, a really cool limited edition version of the album I got at the time. It's in a black can with a 3D skull on top in the album set. It's a little small container, and it's the album on 3 discs. So anyway, there's more stuff there to see. I also put together a Spotify playlist that's on Spotify and embedded in the blog entry called Connection, VA's Best of Keith Richards, and it's my favorite Keith songs, both with the Rolling Stones as well as a solo artist. Also remember to like, follow, subscribe, and hit the notification bell where applicable on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram pages. And please leave your memories of any of the gigs I'm writing about on the platform of your choice. And if you've enjoyed the podcast, be sure to tell your fellow Tunehead friends about it. Help spread the word on mylifeinconcert.com. Thanks once again for listening. This is your host, Various Artists, signing off, and we'll meet up at the next concert. See you then, and see you there. Bye for now.